So, good evening and thank you everyone and welcome. Today is the Commission's public forum for our draft decision for Southern Rural Water. My name is Simon Corden and I'm one of the Commissioners at the Essential Services Commission. To let you know, this forum is being recorded to ensure access to those unable to attend. So any statement, comment or question you make will be included in the recording, which we plan to make available on our website. To start, I'd like to acknowledge traditional owners of all the lands wherever you are today. For me, that's the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd also like to acknowledge traditional owners of the land of the service area of Southern Rural Water and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal people here today. We know that the water and the land is particularly special for Aboriginal people, and that it's cared for and well managed. So I think this is important to acknowledge this at the start of particularly this webinar-based meeting that we're doing about the water pricing review. So thank you all for taking the time to come together this evening, and I'll introduce the staff from the Commission. We've got Dean Wigington, who's a Senior Regulatory Manager at the Commission. He'll be outlining our approach shortly, and we've got quite a number of other members of the water team who are joining us. We've also got from Southern Rural Water a number of people, but I'd particularly like to welcome Cameron Fitzgerald, the Managing Director, who will present to us shortly, and Joanne Butterworth-Gray, who's the Board Chair. It's fantastic to have board members attending these forums to hear directly from the community as to their response to the original submission and our response, our draft decision. And I'd like to thank all of you on the call for making the time to join us today, this evening. So before we get to the agenda, some quick housekeeping. If you have any questions or comments while someone is talking, can you type them in the chat so we can build them into the conversation? If you can please keep your microphone muted when not speaking to avoid feedback and background noise, that'd be really helpful. In addition to your participation today, where you can ask questions of ourselves or the water business, you can also provide written feedback via the Engage Victoria website. But please let us know if there's another preferred method on how we can engage with you, as we're always open to feedback. The web address for Engage Victoria for providing feedback will be on the slides that are about to start sharing with you. Now, I'll use this first part of today's forum to give you a brief introduction to our role in price regulation. But as always, the main purpose of this event is to hear from you and answer any questions you might have on our draft decision. To help shape today's discussion, we'll cover first how we assess the price submission in our draft decision. Then Southern Rural Water will have an opportunity to outline how they're planning to respond to our draft decision. And then we'll have an opportunity for you to ask questions as we go through, and you can ask questions both about Dean's presentation on our approach and also on Southern Rural Water's proposed plan to respond. So we appreciate being able to have an open and honest conversation with you today, and insights from these engagements help us shape our decisions. So about us. We regulate Victoria's energy, water and transport sectors and oversee the fair go rate system, which applies to local government. We also administer the Victorian Energy Upgrades Program. And we've been regulating water prices for more than 20 years, including that of Southern Rural Water. For the water sector, we approve prices and service standards, and we monitor and report on performance and administer the customer service codes. We're currently in this process reviewing the new prices for water that will apply from the 1st of July this year, that's 1st of July 2023, for a total of 14 water businesses across the state. And the prices we approve will reflect an assessment of what the efficient costs water businesses need to recover to provide these valued services to consumers. So following consultation, we'll issue a final determination that sets the maximum prices that Southern Rural Water may charge customers. So now what I'd like to do is ask Dean to step us through how we assess the price submission and our draft decision. So over to you, Dean.
Thank you, Simon. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming along. I'll provide high-level overview of our assessment process and also the key parts of our draft decision before handing over to Southern Rural Water. As the state's economic regulator, we have a defined role in the water sector. The Water Industry Regulatory Order is the key instrument that guides our role in the water industry. That sets out, if you like, the rules of the game. So it does a few important things, like it sets out the nature or the type of services that we're allowed to set prices for. There are some things that are within our scope and some things that aren't in our scope. And also sets out the matters that we need to consider when we assess prices put to us by a water business. And that goes through a range of things like the efficiency of proposed prices and so on, and also draws in elements of the Water Industry Act and also the Essential Services Commission Act. So there are some objectives in those as well that we need to have regard to in our decision-making process. So before each price review, sorry, just go back a slide. Thank you. So before each price review process, we issue guidance that sets out the detail, I guess, drawing on the Water Industry Regulatory Order. So things that we want to see in a price submission so we can assess it. So that's, how did you come up with costs at that level? How did you engage? Things like that, the inputs you used, but also the processes that businesses should go through to inform their price submission, like engagement with their customers. So that guidance also embeds something called the Primo framework, which we introduced in 2018. And a core element of that framework is that businesses engage with their customers to find out what they value most, and also has an incentive framework embedded within it. Businesses that stretch themselves and deliver on ambition can earn higher rewards through higher returns through the process. So that's the Primo framework, which I'll come to a bit later on. Next slide, thanks. So in terms of our draft decision, so it's up to Southern Rural Water to firstly propose prices and services that are consistent with the Water Industry Regulatory Order and also our guidance and relevant legislation. As I mentioned before, we need to assess that it meets those criteria. It's an important step in the consultation process, our draft decision. It's really provides us with a chance to test our initial views, our preliminary views, before we move to a final decision, which is due in June. So it's an important part of our process. Hopefully today helps inform feedback on our draft. Thank you. Next slide. The chart here just shows the red arrows where we're at in our process. So we released our draft decision for Southern Rural Water on the 6th of April, and we're taking submissions up to the 9th of May. The intention is to make a final decision and also a price determination in the middle of June, and new prices will apply from the 1st of July this year. And under Southern Rural Water's proposal, that'll take place for a 5-year period to 2028. Next slide, thanks. In terms of our assessment process, so what we do, we look at Southern Rural Water's engagement and how it's used feedback that it got through its engagement process to inform its proposals. So how did it take what it heard into account in coming up with its proposals? Test the expenditure and demand forecasts. So the key drivers of prices. So engagement with customers is important to find out what they value most in terms of services. The key drivers as the prices are set having regard to the outcome sought are the expenditure forecast put forward by our water businesses. So we test the prudency and efficiency of those, and also the demand forecasts, which look at the volumes of water and connections and things like that, that also are important parts of calculating a price. Key part of what we do is verifying the supporting assumptions and data. So is the data used to come up with prices reasonable? So has the most recent and reliable information been used? Evaluating how Southern Rural Water and businesses generally have managed risk and also its performance. So we do consider how the business has performed in the current period, and that gives you, if a business has performed relatively well, that gives you some confidence that in the future period. I've mentioned reviewing operating and capital costs and timing assumptions, operating and capital costs previously, but an important part of what we do is look at, on the capital side of things, the deliverability of key projects, given what's happening in the economy more broadly, is a key part of what we do. And we do draw on the expertise of consultants where appropriate, particularly to test things like expenditure forecasts. Our draft decision itself accepts a 5-year pricing period, as I mentioned earlier. Important to note that Southern Rural Water provides untreated or raw water to customers, and that includes irrigators, urban water corporations, power businesses, and provides water for the environment as well. Proposes to accept many elements of the price submission. In terms of prices, there's a range of prices depending on the service and the regions, but before inflation, they range from 0 to around 1.5%. Importantly, excluding inflation. So the inflation number released last week, the CPI figure was 7%, and that gets added to prices for 22, 23, 24. So prices will go up by a bit more than what was in those real numbers. Approve their tariff structures, some changes to those. The form of price control was a continuation of current arrangements, which are a mix of price caps, principles, and also a revenue cap. And also adopts a revenue requirement, which is a bit lower than what Southern Rural Water put forward, of 169 million. In response to our draft decision, Southern Rural Water, we've challenged them on a couple of fronts. They need to respond to our draft decision initially to propose updated tariffs, but also we've challenged most businesses to consider the impacts of inflation and also forecast the impacts of inflation on customers, and also how they've taken that into account in terms of the cost projections that it's put forward to us as well. Thanks. Next slide. The operating expenditure, this shows the key adjustment. We're working through the nature of that adjustment with sorry, I think I just dropped out there. Where did I get to?
You said the nature of the adjustment.
Nature of the adjustment was will be worked through with we're working that through now with the water business. So that was in relation to the treatment of some certain costs and revenues relating to headworks. So that, in the scheme of things, wasn't a major adjustment. In the capital forecast too, we had FTI Consulting review the capital program quite carefully of Southern Rural Water, and their review found that was justified. So we agreed with the figures put forward by the business for its forecast capital expenditure. Next slide, thanks. Is there an issue with the slide? Here we go. How's that? It's showing a chart on capital expenditure now. So this is a time series that shows the trend in capital expenditure. So over the current period, what's this saying? It's saying that the business managed its capital program very close to the benchmarks that we set for the current period. So that's a good thing. And there is a pickup in capital expenditure proposed by the business. And I think Cameron will go into that in a bit more detail soon. Next slide on operating costs. So across the sector, costs have been higher in the current period than forecast generally by around 8 or 9%. And I don't think Southern Rural Water's an outlier on that. Are people not seeing the slides? I just got to. Simon,
we can see one that says forecast operating expenditure. So there might be a bit of a delay in your end.
There might be a bit of a delay. 12. Okay, I'll keep going then, and someone can sing out if that's not working. There's a bit of an issue with control over the slides. Looking forward, I think, so there has been a pickup in cost chemicals. We had COVID hit and things like that. And some of the difference in this one is also due to the treatment of non-prescribed operating costs as well, or the majority of it, which we're working through with Southern Rural Water now. I think even outside of that, what we noticed with Southern Rural Water's submission was fairly tight operating costs. A fair few businesses had some increases. Southern Rural Water was generally flat going forward, and given that the key driver OPEX of operating costs of prices, that's helped keep prices lower. Thanks. Next slide. I will.
So we're currently seeing
and-
slide 13, which is we
Yep,
propose
that's
to
good.
accept standard primo price submission
Standard frame
rate.
rate.
Yep.
Excellent. Hopefully, Cameron, by the time you come on, we've sorted the slides, or you, Joey. Just on Primo, I mentioned Primo earlier as the incentive mechanism. Southern Rural Water proposed a standard price submission rating. There are 4 different rating levels, so you can have leading, advanced, standard, or basic. So standard is the third one down. What that means is a business is delivering good value to its customers, generally at a higher level in terms of outcomes and prices. We consider that the business met its expectations for delivery against its outcomes for the current period, so that's a good thing. So it upheld generally its end of the bargain around what it would deliver. Its engagement program was strong, giving customers an opportunity to participate and provide feedback, and was also inclusive and diverse. We did challenge businesses to refine their engagement further since 2018, when there was a big step up in engagement to focus on the breadth and nature of engagement. Its outcome measures and targets. So the businesses put forward the key things that they plan to deliver over a regulatory period, and they provided evidence that they were supported by customers and suggested improvement in some of the targets, which is a good thing. And also has chosen to accept risk on behalf of customers in some areas through its form of price control, and also limiting its price change to CPI for a majority of customers as well. I think the next slide's the last one. If we move to that.
The slide we've got, Dean, says Q&A housekeeping. No. Having some technical difficulties, obviously, today. It's unclear whether it's NBN or Teams. But I'm not sure if Dean is still able to hear us. There's been a few lapses. So, okay, slide 13, we're on, Dean. We propose to accept the standard Primo price submission rating. I'm assuming that's something everyone else is seeing? Yep. So I think Dean has frozen completely. Angeline, were you able to speak to this one?
Yes, sure. So it's slide 13. We're on still. And just to recap, we do accept Southern Rural Water's standard Primo rating. We thought the engagement program met the requirements and provided customers opportunity to participate and provide feedback on prices and services, and the engagement was inclusive and diverse. I've just been told Dean has finished that slide, so if that's the case, should I move on to the next one, or would you like me to go through? Okay, let's move on to, we're now ready to move on to Southern Rural Water.
Okay, fantastic. So apologies, people. This one isn't the first time that I'm sure you've seen these IT issues, and hopefully not the last one. Well, hopefully the last one. But anyway, look, now I'd like to ask Cameron and Joanne to present Southern Rural Water's response to our draft decision. So over to you, and I hope you have less IT difficulties than we do.
Thanks, Simon. So I'm Joanne Butterworth-Gray. Everyone, welcome. I'm the chair of Southern Rural Water Board. I'll just speak for a moment while Cameron organises his slides, because he's going to speak specifically to how Southern Rural Water is addressing the draft determination from the ESC. Look, Simon, I'd like to say it's been a great exercise for Southern Rural Water to go through this process. We took it extremely seriously. The board reviewed proposals put forward by management with a really serious eye on, what's the value that we're delivering for customers, how we engage with customers to test their thinking. So I think it's been a great exercise. I know that we're finessing a few details at the moment, but I'll hand over to Cameron if you're ready, Cameron, so that you can speak to the slides that you're putting forward.
Thank you, Joanne. And to begin with, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that I'm on, the Wurundjeri people, and the lands that you're on, and the lands of the people, the traditional owners that we serve across Southern Rural Water, across the south of the state, 38% of the state's area, an area that's greater than the island of Ireland. So it's a large area. I think in making that acknowledgement, we're really proud of the practical contribution that we're making to traditional owner self-determination. We're so proud over the last couple of years to be the first water business to licence water for traditional owners, and that's been instrumental in supporting the Victorian State Government's development of the Water is Life policy. And so when we give that acknowledgement, we are always thinking about practical things that we can do to support the aspirations of our traditional owners. I'd also like to I'd like to introduce you to my team. So obviously Joanne is the chair of our board. Elisa Hunter is our general manager of strategy, people and culture. Craig Smith is our strategy manager. We have, I think, Clinton Hartley's here, who has also been instrumental in the development of this proposal, and Gemma Abella, who is our Manager of Communications. So thank you. And I also see some very familiar faces on this screen, and I know there's very, very passionate people about the work that many of you do in protecting the environment, and I'll touch on how this proposal addresses some of those matters. So it's nice to see all of your faces, and I appreciate you spending the time to talk to us about our proposals moving forward. So I'll switch to my presentation. And people see that?
Yep, we can see it. Thanks, Cameron.
No worries. I'll do my best to keep control. So, as I mentioned, Southern Rural Water's service area spans the south of the state, and we cover a large number of water catchments. We have a strategy that we launched a couple of years ago, which has a vision of great value for customers and community. And as part of that community aspiration, that's the full aspiration for communities. It's not just about the productive agricultural contributions that we can make to our customers and keeping the lights on by providing water to electricity companies. It's about our environmental, social, traditional owner and economic benefits that we can create for the Victorian community. Of course, as part of those aspirations, we're seeking to be excellent in what we do. So excellence in rural water management is a very important part of that. And we've got some opportunities that we've identified in this price submission that will take us to the next level in our view. So in terms of the things that our customers said were important to them, we talked about sustainable water, and as I just alluded to, that allocations of water are managed in a sustainable way for our customers. We talked about being a valuable community member, that people expect us to not just deliver value for our customers. Our customers are very, very important. We put our hand in their pocket to fund our works, but they expect us to be a good member of the community, to set fair and reasonable prices, which is obviously very important and a very big component of this work, to deliver great service and reliable water supply, and that's very important. A large proportion of our customers are food and fibre providers who feed us. Very large percentages of fruit and vegetables that you buy in the shops in Melbourne and in the south of the state come from our irrigation districts. And they're a really, really important part of this economy and keeping our communities healthy. The headlines for us is that we have worked very hard in engaging with our customers on this proposal. We adopted a model of using our customer groups as well as a reference group specific to this, which provided the opportunity to understand what our customers were expecting from us. That we focused on profitability for our customers, that for customers in our area, we're our business, we serve businesses, and our businesses see value as something that supports their profitability. And so for me, who has come out of the urban water sector, where affordability has been a very, very strong focus and continues to remain so, this is a bit of a different customer base who are focused on what great value looks like from a profitability perspective. And we're investors. So if you look at, in my background, I have the wall at Lake Glenmaggie, and that was construction of that wall began just over 100 years ago. And it was then built upon adding the gates to it about 50 years ago. And now we're going through the next generation of water supply, where we're shifting from earthen channels that leak and wastewater to pipe systems and advanced control to deliver on-farm benefits to our customers. And one of the tenets of that work is that it's co-funded by ourselves and state and federal governments, and I'll touch on that a little bit more. We very much pride ourselves on operating as efficiently as we can, which is an important part of the requirements that ESC set of us, but it is also just an ethic that we must adopt as we provide monopoly services, and it's really critical that we're able to do that. And we've capped prices, so in 86% of our customers will see price rises of no more than CPI, and in Werribee and the McAllister catchment, there will be a bit higher than that, and I'll touch on that in my follow-up slides. I'll start with groundwaters and rivers. I must say that this has been a very strong focus for us. We are proposing prices that are flat for these customers. These customers are people who divert water out of under licence and from groundwater aquifers or surface water, and they must do so aligned with rules. And our job predominantly in our groundwater and rivers business is to be a regulator, and the service that we offer is fair and equitable access that is compliant for all of our customers. So we've got a very strong focus on compliance in this proposal and a bolstering of our teams in this area. The very strong focus comes in two ways. One is moving to automated meter readings. So we will be continuing to roll out real-time metering, which enables us to get ahead of any potential non-compliance issues early. So we've got Taggle devices that have gone out to a very large number of our customers already, and we'll continue that project. And that gives us greater confidence than what we previously have done, and we still do in some of our customers, where we visit twice a year and take a meter read. And if they're out of compliance, then we consider what enforcement action that's needed. That doesn't represent the best customer value, because nor does it represent the best compliance framework. And so we have a big focus in capital investment there. That will also free up time and effort and energy for our people to shift away from driving out to take a meter read to doing more enforcement and compliance work. And we've also bolstered our investment in that compliance work by adding $200,000 to our baseline in the proposal, which has been accepted in the draft determination to bolster that work. We are absolutely dead serious about implementing a zero tolerance approach to compliance, and our price submission has been developed with that in mind. And the freeing up of resources that allow us that arise from the Taggle rollout means that we've been able to keep prices flat in that environment as well. And so we've found, in our view, a very balanced outcome that ensures customers are getting fair and reasonable prices that are within their expectations, but we are finding ways to deliver that zero tolerance for compliance that the community expects of us, our minister expects of us, and we expect of ourselves. The story in Bacchus Marsh, and I'll talk about Bacchus Marsh and Werribee together, because we have undertaken in Bacchus Marsh, we have completed modernisation work. So we now have pipe systems that have replaced some of the old channels. That work was completed in 2019, and we've been able to secure government funding, and that $22 million from government funding that's on that slide represents monies that have been provided by state and federal government for both Werribee and Bacchus Marsh upgrades, and that's because the whole system is interconnected, not via the pipelines, but via our weirs that are useful in those areas. So that's why those numbers are the same. And what we've been able to do is secure almost half of the money that's necessary for those upgrades from government, and obviously part of that contribution then needs to be made by those customers. The reason, and so that has been completed for Bacchus Marsh, and we have flat prices there, or average prices only increasing by CPI. In Werribee, we still have some work to do. So we are piping the system now. We're putting in first pipes for our stages 4 and 5 tomorrow. That kicks off, which is a really exciting prospect for us. And there will be, overall, the system delivers 5.6 gigalitres of water savings, half of which is committed to go back to the environment. And that will be an improvement in river health for the Werribee River, and the other half will be in expanded agriculture through better water security. So did I just drop out there?
It's now visible again, Cameron.
Yep. Did my voice drop out, or no?
No, I think it's all good. We're on a slide that's got the heading Werribee Pricing Outcomes 2023 to 2028.
Thank you. And so those water savings will be split between the environment and production. And we will shift our system efficiency from less than almost 50% to up to and above 85%. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to transform the way water is provided and to share those benefits across environmental users, environmental water as well as production. McAllister's an even bigger story. We've been able to secure $97 million in state and federal government funding. And the contribution that we're asking our McAllister customers to make is $65 million, which generates a price increase. And this is really a really important part of our proposal, that those price increases in Werribee and McAllister are aligned to the customer's contribution to the value add that these projects are providing. And we've secured large amounts of government funding, and the expectation when those funding deeds were signed off is that customers make a contribution to that improvement in service that they are offered through that investment. And that's why those prices are going up. Our system efficiency has already increased. We've completed significant phases of this work, but we're now well advanced in what we call phase 2, which is the last part of modernisation in this area. and that will get us to above 85% water efficiency, again, with 1.7 gigalitres of water earmarked for improved environmental flows. I must also say that when we start this work to modernise, we're not just looking at better practices on our side of the fence. We're investing with the farmers to also improve their practices on their farm. So we do a farm plan with them. We co-fund that with Agriculture Victoria, the local CMA, and ourselves. And what we've seen is a significant switch from flood irrigation to more advanced irrigation practices, particularly using pivots. And that has significantly reduced the amount of water flows from farms and nutrient flows that in the McAllister catchment end up in the Gippsland lakes. And so there's been significant reduction in nitrogen and phosphorus, and we're very proud of that outcome. These modernisation projects don't just deliver great outcomes for our customers, they deliver great outcomes for our communities, and they represent excellence. And so for me, that's us living our vision. In terms of CapEx, I won't touch on this too much because this is the bulked up CapEx number. We are intending on investing a higher degree, as Dean pointed to earlier, higher degree of CapEx than we previously have. We've got an initial focus on completing the modernisation journey, which I've just alluded to. And then we have been very focused on asset management. We've got a 25-year capital plan that looks at our critical assets and focuses attention on making sure that we don't go through, that the future is not waves of investment every 50 years. It's well risk managed investment that represents good customer value and supports the right outcomes for customers consistently without the need to do catch-ups. And so that's one of the premises that we have made in preparing that. And we were really pleased and appreciative of the result in the draft determination to accept that full amount of capital, where we did a lot of work to do the justifications on that, and we think they certainly do represent good value. So overall, we welcome the ESC's draft determination, particularly the rating of standard, which we proposed and has been accepted. We're appreciative of the prudent and efficient operating expenditure that's been recognised, as well as the support for the CapEx program and the tariffs and prices approach. CPI, I think you're absolutely right, Dean, is a really challenging issue, and we will need to provide you with some data to support that, which we will do in our submission back. It is recognised, and has been impressed upon me over the years that it is ESC's job to set maximum prices, and it is the Southern Rural Waters Board, of which Joanne and I are a member, to decide on whether we exercise that and pass that through. And so that will be work that we do through June. And of course, it is important that in those considerations that we're thinking of the full value equation there. And as Dean alluded to, there's the matter of the $6 million odd that we're working through some technical issues in the modelling around in the background of that. And I was really appreciative to Christine and the ESC team who were working really productively with us and constructively with us. We had a great meeting on Friday to work through some of the things that, as the spreadsheet modelling and those sort of things, so that we can clarify what we've tried to do. And I'm appreciative of the time and effort. I know you have 13 of these to be assessing at this time, so you're very busy. So that is the conclusion of my presentation.
Thank you, Cameron and Joanne. Cameron, you've understated. We've got 14, I believe, at the moment. So
sorry, I apologise for that.
Keeping us out of mischief. 13 other. Look, I think it's a good time to open up the discussion now and respond to queries and hear some views from outside, from the stakeholders who've taken time to join us today. We've already got 3 questions in the chat. So I'll start off with the first one, which is from Tracy Anton. She's asked, and Dean, I'll ask you to respond to this first, and then perhaps if Cameron wants to add anything, but Does the Primo framework need reviewing given customer engagement is a problem and customer value is not equaling transparent monitoring, quantity and water quality? These are the outcomes customers should have and matters ESC must have regard to under clause 11 of the Water Industry Regulatory Order and the objectives of the ESC Act section 8, subpara 1. So, Dean, would you like to address that in the first instance?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that. The framework under Primo, what we ask a business to do is demonstrate it's engaged well to prepare its price submission, its proposal. Embedded in the framework as well, there is an outcomes monitoring framework set up in there as well. So the business proposes a set of outcomes and also how it's tracking against its targets. I will say generally what we've seen over the past few years with the introduction of Primo is a step up in engagement. I'm not saying things can't be done better. I think we're happy to hear today or in response to submission issues around the targets that the business sets, and Cameron's here. Cameron, did you want to elaborate on that at all?
So I think with respect to the setting of targets, we've worked pretty hard to meet our vision of customers and community, great value for customers and community. And I think that shows through in some of the commitments we've made around enhancing our compliance activities. These are, I recognise that there is a really strong focus on customers in this process. But in our minds, customers and communities are equal in terms of our vision, and the execution of this, or the development of this, has had both of those things on our minds. Yeah.
The second question we had in the chat, I'll get to the people with their hands up shortly, but we'll just quickly go through the ones. We'll go first in those in the chat that are already up earlier. So John Forrester has asked, and Cameron, if you can respond to this, will urban populations in a regulated catchment be considered as customers when they use and value environmental water and contribute by paying taxes which underpin such prices and subsequent increases?
Two answers to that, John. Number one, the Victorian Environmental Water Holder is absolutely a customer of ours. They own water, they pay our prices, and they make decisions about how water is released, and we have to follow those orders. So they are very much a customer and treated as such. I think the distinction between customers and community is a bit moot in my mind, because our vision is about great value for customers and community, and we can't be firmer on that. And so whether or not we describe community members who might use a river for value it for its environmental values or for its recreational values or what have you, whether we describe them as customers or communities, then neither is more important in our minds. They're both. It is about delivering great value for both of those.
Thanks, Cameron. We've got a question, I think another one for you, Cameron, from Charlotte, who's the Yarra River keeper. She asks, how does the pricing submission take into consideration climate change and decreasing availability of water over time?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. So in large part, our capital investment is driven by an understanding of critical assets. So and those assets are even more at risk when you think about climate change. So our capital program has turned its mind. The development of the capital program has had on its mind the potential for climate change. Of course, we have to justify all of those things to the ESC about being prudent and efficient, which we've sought to do. I think the other piece, which is really, really important, is that our modernisation program is aligned to securing food and fibre supply into the future by increasing the efficiency of the way in which water is delivered. And those uplifts in efficiency from in the 50s and 60s up into the 80s and potentially 90s will represent a really, really substantial resilience benefit for the catchments that we manage, and the sharing of those benefits for rivers as well as for customers represents a pretty balanced outcome in terms of preparing ourselves and being more resilient to future climate.
Thanks for that question. This issue is coming up, as you would expect, across all 14 of the water businesses that we're involved in regulating. The challenge of both potentially less water, but also more floods and droughts. So how you respond to the change, it's a real critical issue. If I could move now to Cameron, if you can go next, Cameron Palm.
Thank you, Simon. We made a submission which expressed concern about the impact of private dams within the Mooroolba catchment, and asking that Southern Rural Water should place greater emphasis on the monitoring and enforcement of and compliance on potentially unauthorised dams constructed. And we noted that we believe that it was substantially a resource issue. The EEC draft decision said that the regulation of private dams was not a prescribed service under the Water Industry Regulation Order 2014, and therefore any costs associated with private dams are not within the scope of the pricing review, and will admit to being still a little bit of a loss to understand that apparent dissociation. But we would ask that would the specific include, this is probably more to the Essential Services Commission, would the specific inclusion of private dam monitoring and compliance within a ministerial statement of obligations on Southern Rural Water be enough to change this stance by the Essential Services Commission, or would it require updating the Water Industry Order 2014?
Dean, I might pass that one over to you if you don't mind.
Yeah, I suppose at the moment we do need to price under the current Water Industry Regulatory Order. Obviously a direction from government in that. I'm not sure of the form of it, but it could be in the WIRA or something of that nature. I might, Anthony DeSaro from the departments here though. Anthony from DECA, it might be a question best that the department considers. Are you online here? Can you hear?
Yeah, good evening. Hi, Dean. Look, with respect to this one, yeah, look, I don't have a lot of background in that particular area in regard to the compliance activities on unregulated dams. But look, yeah, if there is an expectation or ministerial expectation around those compliance activities, we would need to have a think about whether that needs to be considered under a broader context, or whether it should be a prescribed activity under the WIRO. Should be or will be, but there definitely needs to be a conversation about that, and that's something that I can certainly look into further for you, Cameron.
Thank you, that'd be great. I do note that we're a little bit behind on question time, and I know there's quite a few others, so if we can extend the meeting a fraction to accommodate them, that'd be great. Thank you very much.
Could I just add to that, because I think there's been a mindset from Southern Rural Water here that whether or not our services are prescribed or not prescribed, our price submission has sought to express our whole business. And that's one of the things that we're working through with this 6.6 million issue, is how that's accounted for in setting prices, because that's a really, really important matter for ESC, because ESC has to act within its powers. But the matter that I was talking about earlier, Cameron, around making sure that we are investing in compliance resources applies across the board. For us, we are zero tolerance for non-compliance is clearly the expectation of our minister, and it is the ethic that we have sought to input into this submission. The matter of how it then gets accounted for in prices and those things is an important matter in finalising the submission. But I just want to be clear, it was on our mind when we were preparing this.
Thank you.
Right, the dogs have stopped barking here. Thanks, Cameron. Look, that's a really important question you raised, and we'll take that on, dealing with further that on notice, but thank you for raising that. I think the next person is Helen, had her hand up. So Helen, if you'd like to ask your question.
Thank you and good evening, everyone. My question is to the ESC. It's a matter of confusion to me. The Water Act obliges all the water corporations to ensure that the health of all, it's not a very good term for rivers, seeing their living, dynamic, support life, and we all depend upon them, and they're an absolutely essential service, and it's natural. But I'm in a ground, and I don't understand whether, and please don't take this personally, if you understand how our Western volcanic plains, we are groundwater dependent ecosystems, and therefore, especially in drying times, we have lost recharge. We lost recharge in the drought. We haven't recovered from it, with more water being taken out of the river. And yet, from what I understand of the modernisation plan, because now I'm very passionate about the Maribyrnong, up in Landsfield, we have spongy ground supporting a vulnerable species, big bronze toadlet. Everybody says we have to look after that. My river is starved of 7 billion litres of water every year because of extraction. We are in entrenched drying times. Not every drop of water is accounted for or metered for, yet you are all under an obligation to, all the water corporations are under an obligation to protect the rivers and the groundwater. And I don't believe at this stage that Southern Rural Water is getting enough help financially to do justice to the demands of our entrenched drying groundwater supply. And I want you to understand this is critical to community. If we don't act now, we'll be in an emergency situation which will be more expensive. We must face the reality of climate change is there's much less groundwater, there's much less rainwater, and we need to be adapting now. We haven't got a long time to plan, so the prices have got to start reflecting the cost of adaptation. And I believe the ESC has an obligation to ensure this ethical stance within all the things they supervise to do with water, and why we should have to pay to get 7 gigalitres of water back when it was taken from us, I don't understand. So maybe somebody can give me a lesson on that. I've flagged my anxiety, and I want to know that the ESC understands groundwater is critical to us, absolutely critical. And if it goes on like this, we're not going to have much in the West, except problem after problem after problem, and that'll lead to social dislocation. And I better stop.
Thanks, Helen.
So are you going to take that on board, and do you stick to those principles, and will you give us a commitment tonight that you will look into that and we're the eyes on the ground, so you've just got to believe us.
No, thank you, Helen. I'm not sure, Dean, whether that's you or Cameron should respond in the first instance.
Probably for Cameron, but
no, I know.
Thanks, Helen. I appreciate the insights. We'll obviously heard what you've said. We take everything into account. I'm not sure of the specific issue that you raised, Cameron. Did you want to mention anything at your end at Southern Rural?
I certainly, Helen, that's I very much respect that view, and I hear that, and we are obligated to be good managers of rivers and groundwater. We think this proposal takes us a step forward. There are policy matters around how groundwater is managed and the way permissible consumptive volumes are set and those things. And one of the underpinnings of our corporate strategy is great partnerships. And this, to me, is where we need to partner with DECA and yourselves. I know you've been a part of the feedback on our customer engagement approach and whether that can expand to community groups. And we have a discussion with our board tomorrow about that. And we see this as something that we need to partner on. I think the sustainable water strategy that was announced by the government last year represents a pathway forward on, and we need to play our role as Southern Rural Water.
So thank you for that. I think there was an earlier question about whether we can go longer than 7 o'clock. Certainly from the ESC team, we're keen to hear all of your views. So we're happy to extend, and I hope Cameron, your team is able to stay with us a bit longer. Juliet, I think you're the next one that we'd like to hear from.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Like it's a little bit related to Helen's question, and it's about the metering and monitoring of small water users of surface water. I really appreciate your focus, Cameron, on zero tolerance and compliance, which is great to hear. But in many of your catchments, and you're rightly focusing on metering the larger water users, but so many catchments in Helen's, Maribyrnong, Moorabool, Barwon, just as South Gippsland catchments, there are many, many small users whose use is not monitored or even metered. And over half of the licensed volume across Southern Rural Waters region is not actually metered. So how do we know what's going on? And it's a real concern of ours. The small users on their own may not seem very important, but when you add it up, and particularly in conjunction with stock and domestic use as well, there's a huge category of water use where we really don't know what's going on. So, from the ESC perspective, how do we expect, with the capping on Southern Rural Waters prices, how do we expect them to be able to expand their regime when you're not allowing them to increase their prices? And then from Southern Rural Waters perspective, how are you hoping to deal with all these small users who, as climate change begins to bite, will begin to have more and more of an impact on how much water is available for everybody else, including the river system?
So perhaps if I can hand to you, Cameron, I think that
So firstly, just to be really clear, this is our price submission, and ESC is assessing that, and we've put forward the flat prices on that, and so we own that. And what we've sought to do is seek efficiencies through the rollout of better metering, and then use the dividend plus some more. Plus another $200,000 of investment to enhance our compliance workforce. So I just want to be clear about how that came forward, and that was about finding a balance within our customer feedback and within our corporate strategy and our commitment to zero tolerance. With respect to metering, there's no doubt, Juliet, that there is that the regulatory framework focuses on the distinction between irrigation use and use for stock and domestic. And if there is an irrigation use, then it needs to be licensed. And if it's not licensed, we will need to undertake compliance activities around that. Some of that smaller access is not about irrigation, and that is not something that is licensed as taken use. And so the stock and domestic approach there is used, and that's and there isn't metering associated with that. That said, the long-term water resource assessment that was undertaken by DECA, or DELP at the time, a couple of years ago, set out in each of the catchments in the south what the deficit of environmental water is. And the Central and Gippsland Region Sustainable Water Strategy has then responded to that and has outlined a suite of actions that are necessary to get a better handle on how water is used in each of those catchments. And it clearly outlines that there's a lot of work to do. And so for me, the improvement and opportunities here are about the effective implementation of the Sustainable Water Strategy and the achievement of the environmental targets that are set out in that, because they were based on the outcomes of the long-term water resource assessment, which assessed long-term climate change. And so we are a part of implementing those things. So, for example, in the Werribee catchment, we are working on a reconfiguration plan, which would see a significant expansion of access to recycled water for our customers in Werribee and Bacchus Marsh, and the replacement, and that would come with the potential to replace river water, which would then go back into the environment. And so that's something that Elisa Hunter is the chair of the group that is developing that proposal. It is a committed proposal under the SWOS. And whilst I recognise that that doesn't immediately answer your question, Juliet, that's the pathway and the part that Southern Rural Water can play in enhancing water resource management in these catchments. But we need to do it together. We need to do it with our partners at DECA. We need to do it with our catchment management authorities. We need to do it with our community partners, including the Concerned Waterways Alliance and many of the people in this room.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for that. Obviously, the Sustainable Water Strategy is a really important guiding document, but it doesn't cover small users. It doesn't have anything to say about them at all. It doesn't cover stock and domestic use. There are some users which are exempt from not being asked to change anything, and I mean that's a real concern for us. I'm from the Concerned Waterways Alliance, which many of the groups here tonight are members of. And I mean, that's one of our key concerns, is that as others have mentioned, climate change begins to bite and the resource diminishes, we need to know how much water people are actually using in all ways, not just the big users, the small users as well. And, until we bring all users, including plantations and other types of users which are outside the framework at the moment, stock and domestic, and until we bring it all in, we're not going to measure what we've got.
Look, thank you, Juliet. I think, one of the challenges with any of these consultations is sometimes issues arise which the water business has got the ability under the current legislative framework to address, and there'll be other issues raised which are broader issues that, but fortunately we've got DECA representatives listening in as well, and we'll take those comments and considerations on board. If I can hand over to Andrew now, Andrew Kelly, if you'd like to ask your question. You're on mute, Andrew, so you're the first person in this meeting to make that dubious honour.
I'm unmuted.
Good to see you, Andrew.
Good to see you, Simon. Thank you. And I guess I'd begin by just reiterating Juliet's point that, as you might be familiar, Simon, that the Mornington Peninsula has many, many small dams and many small creeks that no longer flow because of those dams. Some of them are used for irrigation. Some of them, I think, are used illegally for vineyard irrigation. Some were needed to establish vineyards but are no longer needed, but the vineyard owners keep them in reserve in case of drought. And, if Melbourne Water really hopes to achieve their healthy waterway strategy goals on the Mornington Peninsula, the dams issues needs to be addressed. And if you read the Western Port document for the healthy waterway strategy, that's explicitly stated by one of the people they engaged with, which kind of leads me to my question, Simon. And yeah, thanks again, which I probably didn't say because I was muted, but thank you to the ESC for hosting this and with engaging with the community, and thank you for the Southern Rural Water. But the issue I wanted to, which I am addressing, in fact, the ESC, and I did want to begin by saying, Cameron has really reached out to the Concerned Waterways Alliance now and spoken to us and engaged with us, and we are deeply appreciative of this. But I still don't feel that community and customer, the two Cs, are actually equal, that still customers are given a preferential engagement, and I hope Cameron will be addressing that. But my question to the ESC, and I'd like to just add two comments after this, is that you've rated Southern Rural Water's engagement as leading rather than standard, yet clearly we as the informed environment community were not really part of that process as far as I can understand. We weren't on community engagement groups at that stage, we weren't on customer groups at that stage, and that the voices were much stronger then, in my view, on the customer side. So we've talked about customer and communities being equal, but I would have thought, as they were not equal, that maybe a standard rating would be better. And please don't take this personally, anybody from Southern Rural Water. I did want to note with the WIRO, which was passed in 2000 or instituted in 2014, it seems to be very out of date. It seems to only allow waterways to be considered in metropolitan areas, which seems truly peculiar. It includes no reference to traditional owners, so it would seem that under the WIRO regulation, the ESC cannot consider traditional owners, and nor would I believe under the WIRO, under my reading, given that I'm not a lawyer, nor could anybody be disadvantaged. Any disadvantaged people who are less able to pay be considered either, that the emphasis is very much on price efficiency. So maybe that's a subsidiary question to the ESC. And my final one is a comment that we talked about efficiency, and if we're piping waterways then, or even open channels, that is in fact a loss to the environment. So that if you're flood irrigating and the water is getting into the rivers, it may be nutrient loaded, which is bad, but it is flow, it is water going into the waterways, which is a good. And that's probably more of a comment, but happy to have you address that, Cameron. So they're my questions and something of a statement at the end.
So I might hand over to Dean. Sorry, I've got dogs barking in the background. Dean, if you're able to just address that issue about what we can consider, because I know quite a number of the water businesses have put up proposals to provide additional support for vulnerable consumers, and we've accepted that as part of the additional spending, but perhaps you could answer the question more broadly.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Andrew, for the comments. I'll sort of focus on the engagement bit first. So I suppose what we do in a price submission, we consider the whole engagement program, and generally I think we agreed with Southern Rural Water that engaged early. As Simon said, we did put a challenge into businesses to undertake more diverse and inclusive engagement, and generally Southern Rural Water and other businesses have also done that. It used a range of ways to engage with its customer base. It did a good job of engaging with its Indigenous community, as Cameron mentioned. Take on board your comments about communities and customers. We're interested in views from communities, so we're happy to hear that feedback you've given about the engagement program tonight. And we've obviously noted that. But if you make a submission, we'll look at that as well. I think that's pretty much it. So I suppose in terms of our engagement approach, we do assess the breadth of the engagement undertaken by a business, which is a big task. You made some comments there about the WIRO and so on. So that's Anthony's here from the department. Yep, that was done in 2014. I think for government, there has been a focus on diverse engagement as well, broader than that. Now, guidance put the expectation there on businesses to undertake a more inclusive engagement program as well.
That doesn't include the environment. That doesn't include the environment. That expansion by DECA has not included the environment, as I understand it.
The expansion, sorry, where's the expansion, sorry?
Sorry. The expansion to consider the expansion of the WIRO to traditional owners, yes, and to the disadvantaged has not, then the WIRO has not been expanded to include the environment, which was advice that was given to Cameron Steele from Palm, from the ESC, that you were constrained by the WIRO from considering the environment, that you couldn't consider that? Sorry, I suspect
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing as well.
Sorry.
Look, I think thanks, Andrew, for raising those points. We're treating this as a consultation process, so even if people don't make submissions, we'll be certainly taking on board. If they don't make written submissions, we'll be taking on board the comments that people have made today. So appreciate what you're arguing, and potentially shortcomings in the legislative framework or the legal framework that the system operates under. Cameron, I wondered if there's any aspect of Andrew's question or comments that you wanted to respond to?
Yeah, I'll take on board the feedback with respect to our engagement, and as you know, we're considering how we might move forward to expand community voice. So I won't go further into that, but just on your point, Andrew, around the water efficiency, in the calculation of water savings, there is the matter of mitigation water that needs to be assessed, and there's a methodology when you look at water savings from shifting from earthen channels to pipes that assesses water that needs to go back to the environment, because although the channels have been leaky, they have been generating positive environmental outcomes, and that part of the water savings needs to go back to ensure that those environmental values are protected. So there is some protection within the model around assessing and measuring savings of water that ensure that some of the good that was happening from old and leaky channels is not diminished by the project.
Thank you, Cameron. Can everybody hear me now?
I can hear you, Andrew.
I was just wondering, could I pick up that point about the Wiro on another occasion, please, for clarification with Dean?
Absolutely. You can engage with the team directly on that one to clarify that, I think.
Thank you.
If you're happy with that, Andrew. Yeah, look, given the time, I'd like to just go now to Jodie, who's from the Platypus Alliance. She's made a question in the chat, but also some detailed comments, but I'll just focus on the question. And the question, I think it's for you, Cameron. Is there scope for Southern Rural Water to incentivise customers to use their water more efficiently, to reduce their need to use water from the river systems in the first place? E.g. Bacchus Marsh, where the Werribee River still doesn't have sufficient environmental flows from Southern Rural Water managed systems. So I think you talked a little bit about earlier about different working with farmers to change their irrigation systems. I wonder if you could talk a bit more on that.
Yeah, there's two parts to that answer in my mind. One is the modernisation journey we've been on is about gaining the benefit of both improved efficiency of the way we deliver water, but also the way that water is managed on farm. And so before anybody gets reconnected to the updated system, they need to have gone through a farm planning process. And that farm planning process is about how they might invest in improved irrigation, taking advantage of the better system that they are now offered, including automation opportunities. So in McAllister, for example, you get an automated outlet, whereas previously you used to have to lift a door often in the middle of the night. And that automation allows you to link up to the watering devices that you have on site, and to optimise the way in which water is used. So we're looking, and some of the key elements of the business cases were about, and one of the justifications for government funding were about not just the improvements we make in our assets, but the double benefits that are associated with on-farm improvements. With respect to Bacchus Marsh and Werribee, I'll point to that that project that I was talking about earlier, where there is a substitution opportunity for river water to be substituted by high quality recycled water. And that's something that we're very, very passionate about. We advocated strongly for that to be included in the Sustainable Water Strategy. It was. We've got leadership of a joint group that's working through that issue, and we think there are opportunities there. There are also opportunities in Pakenham for Kooey Rup and those sort of places as well. They're not easy propositions to get going, but we really think that recycled water will play an important part in protecting rivers and enhancing and providing resilience for great agriculture into the future.
Thank you, Cameron. Lachlan Gordon, I think you've got a question there. Then we'll go to John. I'd like, with everyone's agreement, if we can be finished before 7:30, I think would be a good time, but let's see how we go. Lachlan, did you want to ask your question or make your comment?
Thanks, Simon. I'm with Friends of the Barwon, and we are concerned about lack of flow in the Barwon River as we are in the Moorabool and as we are in the Lee. The Lee gets flow from the Southwest Water Treatment Plant out of Ballarat, about 2 gigalitres a year, which keeps it flowing. But really, we have lack of flow problems in those rivers, and yet fairly recently we had a sheep dairy proposal for near Inverleigh, and that proponent had organised to buy 500 megalitres of unused water licence or sleeper licence. Fortunately, that particular proposal fell through because of Q fever concerns to the township of Inverleigh. I personally own land on the Barwon, and I received in January a letter from Southern Rural Water entitled Temporary or Permanent Transfer of Surface Water Licence Volume. And Southern Rural Water were writing to see whether we would transfer our licence to a pastoral company that was seeking that water transfer. So I wrote to Southern Rural Water, and part of the answer that I got was that the return of water to the Barwon River will be achieved through a combination of obtaining water from different sources as outlined in the Central and Gippsland Sustainable Water Strategy. Now, if you actually read that, there is no pathway for return of water to the Barwon River, so that the answer that I got was incorrect. And I am concerned that we can still have those licence transfers occurring in systems which are under severe threat. Do you have an answer for me, Cameron, on that?
Yes. So the matter of the SWUS, I'll take on advisement. Certainly the SWUS is legislated to respond to the long-term water resource assessment and sets targets. I won't comment on whether or not the actions are strong enough or not, but certainly that's the intention of the SWUS. The matter of trading of licences is people have legal rights to those licences. We can't, if there's a cap on licence take that's been set by the Victorian government, we're only allowed to license within that cap, and it is the rights of licence holders to be able to trade that water within that catchment as long as it follows the rules of the various local management plans. I understand that if those are sleeper licences, that will result in water being used that isn't being used, but it is the legal right of those landholders to be able to trade either permanently or temporarily those licences, and we need to operate within the legal framework that sets out that.
I guess the point that I was making there, Cameron, was that seeing the Barwon has no pathway for return of water, and yet it's possible for licences to be traded. We can keep taking water out, and there's quite a lot that can be taken out of the Barwon, but nothing can go back into it.
So we need to operate within the powers that we've been granted.
Thanks, Cameron.
You're on mute, Simon.
You've done.
Sorry, I'm the second person to go on mute. I see Andrew's disappeared, so he won't be able to rib me about that. John, if we could hand over to you, John Forrester.
Thank you, Simon. Hopefully I'm coming through okay. Good. Just to follow up on the comment on the recycled water into streams, there are a few of us who would have concerns with that. The Werribee River catchment now, sorry, the Werribee River, Lower Werribee anyway, in particular, the farm irrigation area receives a lot of wastewater now, or recycled water, of course, out of Western Treatment Plant. And one of the big worries the farmers has is the amount of emerging pollutants which is coming out of those waters. And in fact, they do call it wastewater rather than recycled water. This is not Southern Rural Water's problem alone, of course, but I'd be hesitant if we didn't know the details of some of that water out of Surbiton Park and other places, for example, which might be used out towards Little River and so forth. And I would be most alarmed if the ESC and other bodies were not taking that into account in all of this discussion about price rises and so forth. There are other water authorities involved, and so it's a big problem, and it will take a lot of good thinking by a whole range of stakeholders to solve it. And it's not just a problem for Southern Rural Water. And while I'm on the microphone, just thank Cameron and Elisa for reaching out to us, or us reaching out to them, accepting us earlier in the year and having a good chat about this sort of stuff. It is a heartfelt and a very strongly felt situation that recycled water is not a great solution at this stage to pulling water flows back into waterways. Thank you.
I agree, John. I think this would be a substitution, so that the recycled water would be used on farm, and that would reduce the amount of water that would then be taken from the river. So the river water would remain in the river. I agree with you with respect to returning recycled water into the river. I noticed in the comment tree there is a matter with respect to emerging contaminants in recycled water, which is, it's a very, very important matter in terms of securing food, and absolutely has to be worked through in any business case development that we do. Still think it's pretty important, though.
Thank you.
I've got one question here from Helen van der Berg. I don't know if that's an additional question, Helen, about how long will it be before S&D use is licensed and monitored in Lancefield? We have a declared GW unit without a plan, without a management plan. We've been waiting since 2006 to get the knowledge deficit of 7G established within the VEWH. No wonder our aquatic diversity is getting worse in the Maribyrnong. A lot of acronyms there, but Cameron, I'm sure you'll be able to work
I'll have to take that one. I'll have to take that one on advisement, Helen. But Elisa, can you capture that on the screen, and can we come back to Helen on that?
Yeah, excellent. All right, look, Lachlan, your hand is still up, but I don't know if that's from earlier. It's now almost 7:25, so I think we've had a really good discussion. I'd really like to thank Joanne as the chair for participating and being actively listening into getting an understanding of the perspectives of people that both who are giving us a very strong perspective from the environmental perspective on the challenges here. I'd like to thank Cameron for and your team for being here today as well to respond to these questions, and my own team. But most importantly, I'd like to thank you stakeholders who've been able to attend between 6 and 7:30 on a Monday night. Really appreciate your time. Between now and the 9th of May, when submissions close, I encourage you and your teams to liaise with Dean and the Commission's water team. They're available to field any questions you have. As I said before, on behalf of the Commission staff, I'd like to extend my sincere thanks for all of you for joining us today. It's been really valuable to hear your thoughts, and we will have captured them. But if you are able to provide any additional points in writing through the Engage Victoria process, that would be fantastic. And at this stage, I'll close the meeting. So thank you all.